Data Center 4.0, the future of the digital ecosystem. In this podcast series from DigitalCentre, data center leader, expert and APAC-based marketeer Omer Wilson will be in conversation with technology and industry experts on the future of the data center and the wider ecosystem. Today's tech-fueled transformation era is putting traditional data centers under unprecedented pressure. This pressure is coming from businesses, users, and consumers from every physical, virtual, and cloud-centric angle. What does the future hold for the data center? Hello and welcome to the next in our series of DigitalCentre Podcast. Really excited today to welcome a partner organization and key steering committee member of DigitalCentre for a number of years now, Megaport. Also an important partner of my organization, Digital Realty Data Centers. We have with us today Jason Bordajenko, who's head of Solutions APAC for Megaport, based out of Brisbane. Jason, welcome.
Thanks, Omer. Glad to be with you today. Happy to be on the podcast. Very exciting to be involved with your organisation and the initiatives that you're putting forward.
Thanks a lot, Jason. Appreciate it. I think we've got a good bit of topics to cover here from both a global perspective on the industry and also APAC. So should be interesting from both perspectives. Maybe if we start and I'll let you do the introduction at a high level of Megaport for the listeners that might not know what yourselves do, and then also if you could touch on the relationship with Digital Realty and with the data center community, and then I can sort of build on that from you if that works.
Absolutely, happy to do that. So Megaport are a global network provider. We manage, obviously, data center interconnect connectivity, of which Digital Realty being one of our key partners. I was just looking back before we started talking. Our partnership goes way back beyond the formal times. I was actually over with the genesis of it in New York, some of the earlier meetings late in 2016, which, funnily enough, I know everyone jokes about, the industry and the comparison to dog years, but 2016 feels so long ago. But obviously many things have changed in that time, but the partnership is going from strength to strength. So I guess one of the main drivers for Megaport and being involved with DLR is certainly the connections that we make with data centers, between data centers, and obviously playing a very agnostic partnering role. So we certainly get a lot of conversations with customers saying, who do you compete with? And it's a really interesting conversation to have with customers, because I think that it's a fairly unique product offering in market. We provide essentially real-time connectivity either between data centers. Don't have to be the same brand on the outside four walls. It can be different data centers across a metro, across a continent, or even internationally as well. And we do that utilising our portal, so we call it the Mega Portal. It drives all of our services, and then underneath that we're actually providing those connections in real time, so about 60 seconds to provision. And of course, the DLR Megaport joint offering that we're all together to discuss was Service Exchange powered by the Megaport backend. And that's DLR utilising our APIs, both talking to our provisioning engines and making that connectivity a reality at those sites that we're connected to. But also then onwards, we're consuming and utilising API calls to cloud providers. So it's that rich tapestry of interconnectivity, we call it, and have called it for some time, the ecosystem, and building out that ecosystem across the multiple cloud providers, public clouds, private clouds. That's really what drives what we do.
Excellent overview, Jason. I agree. The 2016 is 3 years, but in the modern speed of business feels like decades, I think. So it's been a busy 3 years. So really appreciate the introduction. I think Service Exchange, for those that sort of know the industry from the listeners, is quite well known. I guess just to add to that, for those that do follow, as Digital, we've now launched the platform Digital, which is a key go-to-market for us, and and which is quite excitingly coming to APAC this year. Within the Platform Digital suite of products and solutions, there is the SX Fabrics, which is Service Exchange Fabric, which again is that SDN layer powered by Megaport. So really on that topic and looking from a global sort of industry level perspective around where consuming of the cloud is going. Can you touch a little bit, Jason, on building up from the genesis of Megaport, the whole concept of the SDN and having a secure access to multiple clouds? What's driving that, and then two, I guess, which would be really interesting for the listeners, where do you as Megaport see that going?
Great questions. It's a very broad landscape to cover, even in those two, and I think that probably talks to your point about why do the years feel longer than they are. I mean, define cloud. That's the starting point. It encompasses so many things that, strangely enough, companies, enterprises, and customers and partners alike were doing before necessarily we saw the public cloud providers start performing these en masse. But really, the key that they drove was, can I drop a credit card and do this, straight away? Is it possible to do in real time? Do the economies of scale and the billing metrics, do they play in my favour? I was talking to a customer just yesterday who plays in the financial landscape, and they were talking about a regulatory decision that has changed their retention periods for data. And they said, traditionally we've had a 7-year retention period for data, and basically we need to flip that switch. How long's the new retention period? As long as you can keep it. It's effectively infinite. So this is the sort of decisions that we're seeing driven by cloud, because once again, you don't need to dimension and scale for those, those large jumps. Okay, I've got this storage array. I need to go and source, acquire, install another storage array. I can basically have that untapped. But the reality is, and of course, looking back and working with our data center partners, there are certain things that don't work for some customers in cloud. So the hybrid landscape has been quite key for a lot of them. I certainly talk to quite a widespread audience about the lines that exist between, say, the infrastructure, the platform, the software as a service offerings. Those that are involved in them know those lines, but I find continually the way that people utilize those services can sometimes blur those as well. What they're essentially asking for is, as they move through that stack, can I outsource more of what I've had to do myself in the past? There's risk mitigation considerations, obviously, in the example I gave with financial services, that's complying with those regulatory requirements. Cloud answers a lot of those day one, because a lot of that hard work, the getting the certifications, keeping them up to date, the higher standard, the bar raises there, it's certainly easier to do en masse, rather than everyone needing to comply with that. So that's driven the cloud adoption. The multi-cloud adoption, I won't say that people have been driven to it kicking and screaming, but certainly a lot of those conversations are just let us get our head around one cloud provider before moving to others. That's not always the operational reality. And I mentioned that cloud providers are continuously honing and tuning their services. They're adding new services on a regular basis. It's not just, that the grass is greener and I need to move to that new platform that's available to me because, I can outsource more of that component. But it's also about the commercial obligations, the commercial realities of operating an enterprise. It might just be a dollar amount. I don't often see people playing price arbitrage. It's not as simple as that, saying my storage is a cent per gig cheaper here than there. It's probably the on costs to drive that. But certainly I've had examples of a customer who's all in on a particular platform, and they say, that's fine, that's going to do us for now. We've got the hybrid connectivity that we need. It's great to be working with Megaport. It's great to be working with our data center partners to provide that. But beyond that, they go, we're not really interested in looking at the others. And then a week later, there's a decision from corporate office, or there's a merger or an acquisition that's happened, and it becomes a reality so quickly. And they turn to us and they say, how fast can we have this online? I like to give them a very optimistic answer to that. So it's great to have that platform to back it.
Yeah, well, I know. Speed to deployment, both secure access, but also speed to accessing the cloud is one of the key differentiators that made Megaport so unique for us as a partner as well. So I think that's very relevant. So just really diving in, I guess, and focusing on the data center side of the discussion and specifically co-location. Interested to get your thoughts and views around, so you touched on the cloud and multi-cloud and how people are looking at those deployments and hybrid cloud deployments. What's your view and Megaport's view around co-location in the cloud, both in terms of them coexisting, and then you can weave into that, because that's going to be my next question, and we can build on that, was the cloud router part of your offering, which is really quite unique in that side of the discussion. But I'd be interested on your thoughts, and I can add to it after, around co-location, the cloud, how they will coexist, and then sort of, which I think the fabric term is a perfect one, how Megaport's offering for us in the term service exchange, but your offering sits within those two worlds almost.
Yeah, I think going back to the example of what is driving customers to consume cloud, I suggested before moving up through the stack. So going through that cloud adoption model, the cloud maturity, I certainly still get a lot of questions. What should be our cloud consumption model? Where do we start? How do we cost control is one that comes up. So how do we put a wrapper on this? Okay, we're getting asked to provide infinite storage. Our budgets are not infinite. How is this going to work? And I think that comes back to a main driver that I also see for keeping the on-prem components, or the Colo components as well. There is a sunk cost element that people have obviously had the experience with managing lifecycle on servers, managing lifecycle on network equipment, the storage components that sit with that. It's not just about sweating that asset until it no longer makes sense. It's about rationalizing the services that are available in cloud. How do I drive that cloud maturity model? How do I start migrating workloads to cloud where that makes sense? But I find that it's another driver to say my budget has just swapped from a CapEx budget to an OpEx budget. Certainly we like to see that organisations are understanding that it is changing the way they acquire services, but it's not just about cloud providers, as I said before, throwing that credit card on the table. There might be an established system that customers need to draw down on, and they find, the things that I can manage myself, that I have the expertise in-house to do, especially when it comes to some security-related services, that there's a trust level with cloud that, yeah, that's great, you've got the certifications, but still there's something to be said with having those components that are under my direct control. It's not that they're going to press a button and be able to, turn the data center dark. That's not what they want to do. But having the discrete level of control on that data that they know is theirs, that then gives confidence. And you mentioned secure access. So we find towards cloud the starting point for a lot of organisations. They wish to compete generally in the marketplace. They'll take advantage and trial. The AWS famous term is fail fast. Some people love it, some people hate it. We can't have failures, but it actually is a great terminology. We can try different things. We can experiment. We don't need to hook up, fully secure 100% encrypted pipelines day one. We don't need to put production data in there, but we can get the jump on our competition. We can start automating things, or we can start integrating data that we've not done before. And once they take that little bet, they may be doing that on a IPsec VPN connection over their internet connectivity. The next question is, okay, we need to operationalize this. We need to give it the lifeline to that data that it needs, which to that point is residing in that colo space. And it's not about, okay, it's moved now from my existing storage array, it's all in cloud. It's a general slow path to migration that allows them to let go of the things that they don't need to do themselves, either that there's a thinning pool in resource or the agreements aren't in place to maintain that physical equipment in colo. But they can pick and choose a battle, so to speak, which ones go to cloud in preference. So if you think of an organisation that has a lot of experiments, a lot of things differently rolling in the cloud, a lot of those fail-fast projects, if you want to call it that, they should be picking and choosing and prioritising based on what competencies they have, what equipment that they're currently running, where they wish to put those physical investments, and balance that with data centre investments as well.
Got it. Makes huge sense. And specifically on the cloud router, do you want to give a few minutes on how that works and how it was born?
I realise I didn't touch on it in the example there, but it actually builds nicely from it. So, and I love this bit. You say router, I say router. I think I'll say data center, you say data center. It's not an Aussie accent. We've got to blend those. So we're going back in time again, the history lesson of what we call MCR, so the Megaport Cloud Router, and in the DLR parlance is the SX Cloud Router. I'll say Cloud Router in this case. So where did that get born? So that was a early 2018 release for us that it came out. It's kind of hard. Once again, these things are in development for so much time. I'd rather talk about how we got to where we were and talk through the genesis of that product offering. So talking through multi-cloud, I mentioned that sometimes that's not the strategy that our customers wish to pursue from day one. And if we call it a multi-cloud enablement product, it's not necessarily doing it a service. We noted that what Megaport were doing, we were playing in effectively two parts of the puzzle. We were looking at layer one for the physical ports, so the optical ports that make up the networks that are provided in the data centers, 1 and a 10 gigabit per second port. Now we're looking at 100 gig per second, so there's innovation in that space as well. And building on top of that were our virtual cross connects, or the VXC product. And they were effectively a layer 2, a VLAN, if you will, between any two parts on the network. What we saw with our customer deployments is that they might start out, I want to acquire a link between A and B. It was quite a simple construct. That A and B could be two ports in different data centers that they're consuming themselves between their own organization. It may be a business-to-business exchange, so someone that was already on the Megaport ecosystem, running a private cloud offering or something like that. And of course, the CSP, the cloud service provider connectivity. So we've already got the layer 1 components running for the cloud service providers. In most cases, we've got the automation components. I mentioned the dip into the API language that the cloud providers use, and we've been building on that, and that's really the core building blocks of the Megaport offering. What we saw in terms of what customers were asking were to move more towards a layer 3 service. We had it to a degree with Internet Exchange, but it was only for those peers that were participating in the Mega IX and affiliated IX offerings worldwide. What they wanted was a private IX in essence. They wished to connect multiple layer 2 services to each other. So instead of building, if you think of a simple 3-site connectivity, instead of building their own mesh, they'd look to putting a routing component, a layer 3 component into that mesh. So effectively, then we had to make the decision where do we put this? If we're keeping it local and we're just talking about East Coast US, West Coast US, East Coast of Australia, for example, or Singapore or Hong Kong, it makes those decisions relatively easy. But when you start looking at the customer connectivity, it's not as simple as saying there's an easy midpoint. Wherever you take that traffic, there's going to be a component of latency if they're pushing it beyond where it would normally need to go. So it's not that the cloud router is replacing the VXC services. It really augments and gives another decision tree. I like to call it my Swiss Army knife as well. It performs a lot of functions in the network that go beyond routing, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. What we also saw, and I mentioned that customers were driving towards true cloud adoption. So instead of the lift and shift, I've got my VM on a server that I control and I'm now moving that into cloud, they wish to start moving more towards platform services. The challenge with platform services were the first thing that a cloud provider would ask is, give us your public IP space. And depending on the size of the customer, depending on the legacy that they had, they might have had a lot of servers on-prem or in Colo, but they may not have necessarily had their own portable IPv4 ranges. So one of the things that we looked to do was how do we enable those platform as a service offerings? How do I move my storage into S3 if previously the only way that I could do it was over my internet connections? It's great that I've got these 5, 10 gig connections on a private method, so Direct Connect in this case for AWS for S3. But the first question I get asked is, where do I set up that routing? So what we did with MCR, and certainly at the outset, we actually introduced early 2018 a product offering to market that was, in essence, a virtual router running in multiple locations across our network. Customers could pick and choose. They could opt in, use it for a month. They could turn it on, turn it up as they needed to do for migrations, and turn it off if they wished. They didn't have to permanently acquire, install, and configure those routers. The main thing that I saw for the drive towards the uptake of platform services was just make it as simple as possible to configure. So we did a lot of work behind the scenes that probably goes unnoticed to some degree in what we call optimizing those cloud connections. So not just I want to connect to a cloud service provider, not just I want to access the platform services or the public peering, but we automated in a lot of cases the end-to-end connectivity. So it's no longer a waiting period. It's no longer going off and finding the IP addresses. It's making educated guesses based on the data and the intelligence that we had. And we've revised that product offering. We've actually changed from 7 speed tiers. There's now 4 speed tiers. So you can work from a 1 gigabit per second MCR all the way up to a 10 gigabit per second MCR. Whereas previously the other offering we actually capped at 5 gigabit per second. And we've hugely increased the number of locations that's available at, and of course a lot of the DLR sites in the US as well.
Excellent summary. Yeah, I think from a DLR perspective, we've seen customers really value that, especially from the corporate world. Clearly, when they're having to access, as you rightly said, multiple location access and different speed requirements, and then security. A lot of it comes back to security, especially with our financial services customers. So really excellent discussion. We're sort of slowly approaching the last eight or so minutes. So I'd like to look a little bit to the future now and get your views.
Have to pull out the crystal ball.
Absolutely. We talked about the 3 years past. Now it seems like even 6 months is a decade now. It's so difficult to predict where everything goes. But let's give it a shot. I'll specifically, obviously, in the remit of SDNs, cloud access, Colo, and where it's all going from. In terms of digital, I guess. The whole platform digital genesis and requirement was driven by the market. Really, how the sheer speed and scale of digital transformation and what customers are requiring is really moving at breakneck speed. So platform digital is really our response, and as we mentioned, SX Fabric and the Megaport component is so key in that. So we're seeing digital transformation mean that global access, multi-location access, really being able to scale an easy, almost one-stop shop end to end, be it small few racks Colo right up to multi-megawatt whole site deployments for the large cloud providers is now becoming standard, and even small growing companies are starting with a few racks in different parts of the world now as they grow, and then really scaling up quickly. So that's something I think we see as a trend developing. And then, of course, getting away from the terminology, but the whole edge discussion, and if we bring it back into APAC, the huge populations now within, be it Southeast Asia, India, and then of course China now increasingly coming online, and how the edge is going to play into that in the coming years. But from your perspective and Megaport's perspective, what sort of those discussions you can share clearly, but how is Megaport looking to the future and preparing for it?
So multiple strands. I think if we go back across, how do we accelerate beyond layer 1 and layer 2 that we were providing with the Megaports, the physical components, and obviously delivering on top of that the virtual circuits, the virtual cross connects that we have. So we've done that to a degree, and obviously there's been a great uptake and learning curve on the cloud routing capability. Beyond that, how do those play with the concepts that you mentioned, and how many of these are fully formed, and how much of them are architecture? And that's always going to be the debate. We're in an industry that is moving at a pace that is hard to necessarily contain all those components. It is inevitable that some vendors will take hold of those terms. It's not for the industry to wrangle it back. It's to work towards making those desires that the customers have a reality. So we'll go back over a few of them, I think, that are key there. I walk into a room, and if I start the conversation with Megaport is an SDN, I'm probably going to take 50% on the journey with me, and the other 50 will go, that's actually not my conception of what SDN means. So we could almost get into a religious debate here. The reason that I call what we do a software-defined network is that we are using the software. We're providing, I mentioned the optimizations, the API integrations that we have, providing the software portal, providing that via the API to partners such as Digital. Those components make up a very tightly integrated as a service offering, and I think that drives the software-defined networking piece that we do. Is it going to match with everyone's expectations? No, everyone's expectations will be different. Some will be looking at open flow type distribution. Some will be thinking of SDN in terms of the white box type environments that cloud providers have obviously driven in the market as well. I think it is all of those things. I think it is quite a widely encompassing piece. It's not necessarily the way we do it, but I think that if you look at those components being built together, it's inevitable that they'll coalesce into that what the customer really wants to drive. We talk about SDN in a broad sense, but is it software-defined networking? Well, yes, that's the outcome. The networking is there, the software is there. It may not necessarily be a single control plane. We want to give as many of those interfaces as possible. What I feel is a key driver, you mentioned marching towards edge. So edge is it's still getting fully and formatted and defined as a term, but essentially who controls the edge and how deep does it go? That's the argument that I think a lot of people are having. Is it the mobile phone cell towers? Is it to that degree? Is it the data centers that are distributed across the globe? It could be and probably is still reliant on a lot of those. Each are going to have the plus and minus. What we see a lot of our customers asking for is to move beyond their previous concepts about LAN and WAN. I mean, I'm taking it back to those simple components. We talk about a VXC, it's a VLAN, all right? So everyone knows that LAN. What we've actually done with Megaport is we've stretched that LAN. So in effect, we've kind of marched into a new term, or it's not a new term, but it probably sound like marketing here, the SD-WAN. So we are developing the software-defined wide area network. We're utilizing those LAN concepts. We're stretching that boundary. Where that comes into Colo space is you no longer have to think of those demarcations as hard lines. We don't need to think of it being a firewall and a NAT boundary before I start talking to the internet. I don't need to necessarily think of those VPN components. I can treat those resources that are at arm's length. Might be another side of the city, or it might be across the continent to get to those cloud resources. I can treat that as if it is my own LAN, and that really changes the concepts that people have in terms of how do I build out that hybrid architecture. Beyond that, though, we still have a problem to solve, and that's usually branch offices. And we do have the challenges around branch offices of they are going to be residing behind those termination points. They, of course, will sit sometimes on, I won't say consumer grade, but maybe lesser grade than data centers are used to providing in terms of telco circuits and nailed down connectivity. But the beauty of the Megaport model and the beauty of the as-a-service components around networking is we want to give that same flexibility that looks and feels as if, I'll stand up a 4G connection, right, at my data collection site. Let's call that the network. But by the way, I need this really WAN site because it's on a mobile connection. I need that to be part of my LAN. So we then fall back to the components of, all right, where am I connecting to? Okay, that's now a single point of failure. I can take out the points of failure with my links. I can have multiple links, but if they're all going back to a VPN concentrator that's sitting on-prem, I've obviously failed. That site is not highly available. We've got some great designs. We'll do a little plug for a blog my colleague Steve too has put together. There's a scenario design piece that we have authored on the Megaport blog called the 9 scenarios. Sorry, I get the right one. 9 common scenarios for multi-cloud design. It encompasses a lot of things, but it takes customers, it takes prospects through what is the Megaport value, how does it work with Colo, do I need an MCR? And of course, it references multi-cloud, but a customer may only start with one. It still is quite a few of those concepts that they need to nail down and put together. Where we find them going beyond that is, how can you now help us with our SD-WAN strategy? And a lot of the decisions that we're having now and a lot of the discussions internally are, we've got some really great deployed components in the MCR, the cloud router. What if we were to treat it beyond just cloud? We're actually looking at the IX services we provide globally as well. Because although we're a private network today, these IX services, in the great part, it's a healthy mix of content source and content sync. There's going to be those CDNs that are resident at the data centers. They've got a lot of content to give. You know, the content delivery networks, the Akamai's, the Cloudflares, those guys. They're certainly resilient. They're highly architected for failover tolerance. The customers where they sit, they're generally on the internet networks. They're, all tiers, right, up and down the stack are connected to IXs for peering to those content delivery networks. Where do cloud providers sit? They're somewhat in the middle. So they're generally providing CDN-like services. Obviously, they've got great internet front doors, and they're providing private connectivity services. So we talk about Direct Connect, we talk about ExpressRoute, partner interconnect with Google. So when we look at those, we go, what's the mixing point? What's the edge for that? Well, we need to put that edge as close to the customer as possible. It may not be in that cell tower that they're connecting to, but that next hop back is probably going to be a data center. I'd love it to have your branding on it, and I'd love it to have a Megaport MCR in there. So I think we're thinking ahead to maybe layers above layer 3, but certainly just providing a routing service alone won't cut it. We need to blend those components together. Sorry about a long-winded answer there. Certainly the 9 common scenarios of multi-cloud design, I think, is a great document to reference around that. It doesn't necessarily go down to the branch localities, but as soon as you start putting the thinking of it's not just, point A to point B anymore. You build out that map in your mind. How do I provide that on a scale to multiple service offerings in the network?
Perfect. No, I've read that blog, and it really does summarize it very well. We'll make sure to make that accessible. If it isn't already, it may already be via the DigitalCentre platform on the Megaport pages. Well, I think we're at the end of the time. Really, really great discussion. Been speaking with Jason Bordachenko, the head of solutions for APAC for Megaport, based out of beautiful Brisbane. Jason, any passing words? Want to say anything to the listeners?
Oh, Omer, it's exciting to be involved with yourselves, and really appreciate the ability to have a chat with you. There's a lot of offerings, there's a lot of movement, as we say. I think keeping connected with these sorts of engagements, and of course the written content as well. We like to tune what we're doing to how people want to consume, and we're hopeful of doing more of these in the future. So thanks for the opportunity.
Very, very much appreciated, as is the Megaport partnership on DigitalCentre and within Digital Realty's go-to-market solutions. So thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Jason, for your valuable time. Again, all listeners can access a lot of the content we've mentioned, and Jason directly referenced here from DigitalCentre.technology. You can find it on the homepage, and also specifically the Megaport steering committee pages. And then obviously also from there you can link to megaport.com. But we'll make sure quite a few of the documents, especially the blog Jason has referenced, is available for download. Please do keep following us online, social media, web, and via our mailing list, and we will promote the next podcast very soon after this. Thank you again for listening.